25 years of Match of the Day is celebrated in these 3 BBC videos, charting the nation's favourite sport through the 60s, 70s and 80s.
When a series of anonymous letters threaten a local politician, Spender's on the case.
I have to say that everyone else is taking these silly little notes a lot more seriously than I am.
Silly little notes don't threaten people's lives, man.
You and I are going to be working together on this one.
You never were short on good luck, were you, Bobby?
Good night, then.
Good night, Bobby. Sweet dreams.
Spender investigates Tuesday at 9:40 on BBC1.
In 10 minutes, we'll be bringing you highlights from this week's European Figure Skating Championships in Sofia. First, we join Michael Buerk for the latest Gulf news.
At least 24 Iraqi planes have taken refuge in Iran, according to the Pentagon. 7 fighters flew across the border last night. 1 burst into flames and 2 others were damaged when they made emergency landings in northern Iran. Iraq says it wants the planes and the pilots back, but Iran says that any planes that fly into its territory will be seized and kept until the war is over.
Near zero sortie rate for them.
Pentagon spokesman said at least 12 Iraqi fighters and 12 transport planes had landed in Iran, though there was still doubt about why they were there.
I can only presume that they either, 1, don't want to fight, or number 2, they are defecting, or the possibility that they're trying to husband their resources.
Whichever it is, American Secretary of State James Baker said tonight Iran had given this assurance.
That aircraft from either side of this conflict that arrive in Iran will remain there for the duration of the conflict.
Mr. Baker had earlier met the Soviet Union's new Foreign Minister, Alexander Bezmetnik, who arrived with a warning that the Allies must show restraint in the Gulf.
We've got to be careful about the scale of the military operation so that the American servicemen and the civilian population in Iraq and the city itself and the economic infrastructure of Iraq do not become the victim of what is happening, because it was not in the Security Council resolutions.
Mr. Baker told Mr. Bezmetnik that America was very concerned about the Soviet crackdown in the Baltics. But neither man would speculate on whether next month's arms summit in Moscow is still on. That'll be discussed when the Soviet foreign minister meets President Bush on Monday. Mike Smart, BBC News, Washington.
There'll be more Scud missile attacks tonight on Israel and Saudi Arabia. The Israeli targets were Tel Aviv and Haifa. The Israelis say all the Scuds were destroyed by Patriot anti-missile rockets, and there are no reports of any injuries.
Volleys of Patriot missiles were fired against 2 salvos of Iraqi Scuds in less than 10 minutes. Most were intercepted, but the Israeli Defense Force has confirmed some debris hit Israeli soil. This time there was only minor damage to some property. Chemical experts were deployed, but there's no evidence the Iraqi missiles had anything other than conventional warheads. No one was hurt last night, but it seems Saddam is determined to keep up his attempts to provoke Israel in the face of the government's policy of continued restraint. Carol Walker, BBC News, Tel Aviv.
The other Scud was aimed at the Saudi capital, Riyadh. The air raid warnings were sounded and Patriots were launched. The incoming Scud was hit and debris was seen falling to the ground at the edge of the city. There have been no reports of casualties or damage. A million tons of oil now covers 70 miles of the Saudi Arabian coast. The Americans say the Iraqis are pumping the oil out deliberately. The Iraqis say it's happening because of American bombing. The United States is sending a team of experts to cope with what may be the world's worst case of oil pollution. The slick, stretching from Mina Al Ahmadi, is moving south at a rate of 13 miles a day.
The oil is still slurping ashore today along the tense Gulf Coast, where occupied Kuwait runs into eastern Saudi Arabia. Whoever is to blame, the impact of the disaster on the Arabian environment is all too plain. Along this stretch of beach, cormorants by the score are dead or dying. Whatever the final extent of this pollution, Allied military sources stressed again today it won't impede action to liberate Kuwait. This crude oil is too thick to set on fire easily. It has begun to sink beneath the surface already, so shouldn't inhibit any American amphibious operation.
This is by far the worst that the world has seen as far as an oil spill is concerned. This is an order of magnitude greater than any tanker accident that we've seen before.
Tonight, the whole of the Gulf is waiting apprehensively. In the ancient fishing communities, a way of life is going to be eclipsed by a deliberate act of war. It is Saddam Hussein's message to the Gulf sheikdoms who thought they were out of his reach. There was a time, not long ago, when the international community reluctantly acknowledged Saddam Hussein's skills at self-promotion and diplomatic opportunism. These scenes are proof of the strong man's latest blunders. Brian Barron, BBC News, the Gulf.
Allied pilots have flown 1,000 sorties in the last 24 hours, fewer than in previous days. And bad weather has hampered reconnaissance missions, but the bombing continues. Allied pilots say they've turned Republican Guard positions into a fireball that can be seen 200 miles away. RAF tornadoes hit Iraqi army supply lines between Kuwait and Baghdad. Iraq fired Frog missiles into the Saudi desert. RAF Jaguars attacked a silkworm missile site on the coast. Iraqi television has shown pictures of civilian casualties it says were caused by the Allied bombing. The pictures were shot by Iraqi newsmen and brought out through Jordan for Western broadcasters. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Jeremy Bowen reports.
Iraqi television released these pictures. They say that they show members of Iraq's large Christian minority at a mass in the country's oldest church. The Iraqis say that St. Thomas's in the northern town of Mosul was damaged in Allied air raids. The Iraqis also released these scenes. They say that they show victims of Allied bombing in Kirkuk, a town 200 miles north of Baghdad. It's not possible to establish the truth of that. The Allies say that they're trying to avoid killing civilians, but they accept that some casualties are bound to occur in a war of this magnitude, even when they aim only at military targets. The Iraqis say there have been 113 air raids today against military targets and what it calls residential areas. 5 Allied planes and missiles, it said, were shot down. Again, these figures cannot be checked independently, only compared with Allied accounts.
While the air offensive is now concentrated upon the Iraqi army and its supply lines to Kuwait, the Allies' armies are preparing for the land battle.
So far on the ground, this is still a camouflage net war. Typical of it, men of the 7th Armoured Brigade rehearsing a scenario in which a breach has been made in the enemy line and British forces push through it.
Sierra 1632 hours.
347 Brigade.
Yankee
0.
But nothing like this has actually happened yet. Commanders are waiting for the air bombardment to do its work, and they will resist any pressure from outside events like the ecological disaster in Gulf waters to bring the invasion date forward.
One's initial reaction is immense irritation and anger, but I'm sure that one's superiors will not be putting that forefront in their minds, and the plan will be held and will be used whenever it's necessary. I wouldn't expect anybody to do something precipitous if it was going to cost lives. I think we'd hold our nerves and do what is necessary at the right time.
The Allies have equipment that turns night into day, yet they cannot predict what modern armoured warfare will be like. But with their tanks ready to go, British commanders on the ground do not agree with forecasts of a long drawn-out and costly war. They still believe it can be won with relatively light casualties. This is Martin Bell with 7th Armoured Brigade for the British Television News Pool.
2 bombs have exploded in a Turkish city which is close to an American airbase. No one was injured in the blasts at the American consulate and the Turkish-American Association in Adana. 3 miles away is Incirlik, a US base for bombing missions against northern Iraq. Tens of thousands of anti-war protesters have demonstrated in Washington tonight. During the day, there were peace demonstrations in several European cities, including London.
Tens of thousands in Washington from across America marching against what the banners called a war for oil. Numbers today far exceeding similar protests last weekend. Speakers attacking the cost of the military operation in the Gulf.
The president's asking for a blank check to bail out the war in the Middle East. We must reinvest in America, in our children, the homeless, our cities, and our future.
Today's biggest demonstration in the German capital, Bonn. Up to 250,000 people calling for an immediate ceasefire, ignoring their government's warning that protest would damage Germany's reputation. Though, as some made clear, it was already tarnished by claims that German firms had helped build Iraq's war machine. Demonstrations were smaller in scale in Britain, though no less committed to ending the war. Several thousand marched through London to converge on Trafalgar Square. Their calls for peace given fresh impetus by the huge oil slick threatening the Gulf. Only an immediate ceasefire, they heard, would allow such massive pollution to be dealt with.
The saving of the world.
The next scheduled news is at 1. For now, good night.
Sunday night on 1 and a special Songs of Praise from Liverpool. At 7:15, Motoring Matters in Only Fools and Horses.
Told you they stopped making spares for that van years ago. I've tried everywhere. Breakers' yards, spare shops, archaeologists.
At 8:05, Lovejoy mixes business with pleasure.
If you're going to be around for a few days, we should have dinner.
When did you have in mind?
Tonight.
At 9:30, That's Life reports on the largest TV auditions ever to find a new presenter. At 10:10, the Great Hall of the University of Exeter is the setting for the ongoing search for Mastermind. Then Everyman at 10:40 travels to Guatemala to follow Englishman Bruce